guys, it's Alice, and today I'm going to talk about the books I've read so far in May. This reading month has started off very well, so I have quite a lot to talk about, and the first book is Speak No Evil by Usudinma Eveala. This is a literary fiction novel, and it's set in Washington, D.C., where we meet a young man who seems to have everything going for him, but he is carrying a painful secret, and that is that he is gay, and he's only ever told his best friend, but then one day his very conservative Nigerian parents discover the truth. This is a relatively short book, but it's surprisingly powerful, and I really liked it. I've been thinking about it a lot since I finished it, and even though I don't think it's the perfect novel, it's one of the better books that I've read this year. There are a lot of interesting themes in this book, and I especially liked reading about the experience of being the child of immigrants and constantly being torn between two cultures. And I also think that the friendship we see between the main characters in this book is a really interesting dynamic. I really liked getting to know our characters in this, and I especially liked reading from the perspective of the young man we meet in this. We get pretty deep into his head, I feel, and we get to see all of these thoughts and emotions that he has about his sexuality and his self-worth, and sometimes it is so incredibly painful, but it feels very honest and raw, and I think that the writing in this is so good at capturing characters and their feelings, and there is a sort of tenderness to it that I really like as well, although sometimes there's stuff in here that's just so painful, but it's captured in a way where you can't help but feel it. I do think that this book starts off with its strongest part though. It's separated into two different sections. The first part, which is the majority of the book, is told from the perspective of this young man. And then in the second part, we move on to the perspective of another character. And I feel like the story sort of lost some of its magic in that last part, and I felt like the end came about very abruptly. I also think that, this book touches on a lot of different themes, and sometimes I wish that we had gone a little bit deeper into those themes. I understand that we can't do everything all at once in one novel, but I would have loved if it had gone a little bit deeper in some of the other themes. Another thing to note about this is that this is one of those books where dialogue is not clearly marked in the text, and I think for some novels that works really well, and it works for the most part in this, but there were some sections where I felt like that was less successful. I do think this is so worth the read though. The writing is gorgeous and the themes are really interesting and important, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I think this is just a very well accomplished novel. The second book that I finished was Glasstown by Isabel Greenberg. This is a graphic novel, and in it we meet the 4 Brontes and we get to know the imaginary world they created when they were children. So this is the first book that I've read by Greenberg, and I adored it. I thought the story was really intriguing and I loved the artwork. The story in here is fiction, although it is obviously based on the Brontes, who were real people, and it is true that they created this imaginary place, and I really liked that. I thought that worked really well, and I loved getting to see both the siblings in their real life and the world that they have created, and I like how the further into the story we get, the more the line between the two worlds sort of blur. I really liked getting to know the characters in here, both the historical ones and the fictional ones, and I do love the artwork in here. I love the use of different colors, and I really tried to take my time to actually look at the art. Maybe that sounds a little bit weird because obviously when you're reading a graphic novel you are looking at a lot of the art, but I tried to really take my time with it, and there are several full page spreads in here where there isn't really a lot of text, and I tried to really take my time with those pages, and it was just amazing. There is a certain melancholy and sad feel to the story, and sometimes it gets a little bit dark, but I really like that, and I feel like that suits the Brontes perfectly, because if you know anything about them, you'll know that there is some darkness there, so I really like that. I would definitely recommend this if you like graphic novels, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read Processen by Malin Persson Giolito. This is a sort of mystery slash crime novella, and it's set in Stockholm after a terrorist attack, and we meet a young law student who is implicated in the investigation, and he is brought in for questioning. Now, I have previously read 2 other books by this author, one that I really enjoyed and one that is one of my favorites. And I feel like this has become one of my like auto-buy authors, and I'll read anything she comes out with, which is why I got this one. One of the things I love about this author is her writing style. I think it's really unique and it just captures me for some reason. And the other books I've read by her are on the longer side, and we get really deep into the heads of the characters. But this book is only like 85 pages, and I didn't feel like any of the magic part of her writing came through in this at all. I also didn't really feel that engaged in the storyline in this. I feel like in her other books, we have all of this time to build up the mystery and build up the tension, and it's sort of slowly unraveled, and it's amazing. But we didn't have time for any of that in this. This is also a book in a series, so one of the characters in here that we meet also appears in some of her other books, and to be honest, I don't know why that character was there. Like, she could have easily been replaced with someone else and it would have made no difference. Honestly, if I had read this book and I didn't know who the author was, I would have never guessed that this is who wrote it. So sadly, this was just really disappointing, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a fiction slash historical fiction novel, and it starts off in 2001 at this coming of age party for this 16-year-old girl, and at that party we meet her parents and her grandparents, and we sort of unravel all of their stories. I really enjoyed this book when I read it, and it's one of those books that's really easy to just sit down with and get lost in for a few hours. I really like the writing style of this. It's kind of stripped down but still lyrical, and there are some sentences that are just so beautifully crafted, and I really like the way this story shifts between perspectives and moves backwards and forwards in time. I really liked getting to know our characters in this and seeing them relate to each other, and there is a lot of emotion in them, and seeing their stories unravel was fascinating. There are a lot of themes in this book, but I didn't feel like the way it's written deals with it in like a stereotypical way. All that being said though, I just didn't fall in love with this book, and to be honest, I don't know how memorable it really is. Like, I don't think I'm gonna, like in a few months time, I don't think I'm gonna remember any of this. I liked it, but I didn't love it, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. A lot of people do seem to love this book though, so I feel like it's worth giving a go, and I think it's worth reading even if it's not going to be like your favorite book. Then I read Elevation by Stephen King. This is a science fiction novella, and the story is set in the small town where a man discovers that he is steadily losing weight without looking any different. This was a quick and mostly enjoyable read, and it's one of those stories that's weird enough to make you sort of keep going to try and figure out what's going on. I really liked the setting of this, as I always do when things are set in small towns, and I thought the characters were okay. They're not particularly like well-rounded or anything, and you don't really have time to get to know them beyond the surface level. I've seen this described as horror, by the way, and I don't think that's what it is, which is why I said it was a science fiction novella. Even though what's happening to this guy is really weird and interesting, it's not like creepy at all. Now, I did have a slight with the way that the weight of the character was dealt with. He is overweight, and sometimes that's referred to and it's fine, but then there are other parts where the way it's discussed or talked about, I just really didn't like, and it made me very uncomfortable. I don't know if it's meant to be that way, but I didn't really like that. There is a clear message to the story. It's about acceptance and openness and friendship and all of that is well and fine. But I don't really know if I felt like the way we got there was particularly original, even though it has this weird thing going on in it. And to me, this sort of just felt like an average story. And I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. It probably would have been a 3-star book if it hadn't been for that part where this guy is just fat shamed, because it just made me so uncomfortable and I don't know what to think about it. Next, I picked up The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a classic and it contains the story of both The Little Mermaid and the True-Hearted Tin Soldier. It's been ages since I read The Little Mermaid and rereading it was wonderful, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about this. I really liked it and I like the added artwork in this particular edition. The art is only in the first story, but that's fine, and I do really love the story of the True-Hearted Tin Soldier. It's like one of my favorite lesser known fairy tales. I always love how much darker the original fairy tales are than their modern adaptations, so I really liked reading this. I think that this edition is really nice, I like the art, and it was just very enjoyable, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Second to last, I finished Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is a literary fiction mystery, and it's set in a small Polish village where several people have turned up dead, and there is this elderly, kind of odd woman living outside of town who thinks she knows something about it, but no one will listen to her. So I had like weirdly high expectations for this book because a lot of people have told me that they think I'm going to like it and it's been recommended to me loads, and it's just one of those books that I thought I would really love and then I just didn't. I liked it, but it didn't quite make it home for me. The thing I liked the most about this book was the writing, although I think sometimes it gets a little bit too whimsical. I really liked the setting and I liked getting to know our characters. Our main character is very interesting and I didn't always feel that connected to her and I didn't always understand her, but I think she offers a very interesting perspective to the story because she's like an astrologer and she's a little kooky, so getting her view of the story was very interesting. What I struggled with the most in this was the plot. This is kind of like a mystery novel. It doesn't feel like that, but there is a mystery in here. And I felt like the build-up to that was so slow and sometimes very uninteresting. And to be honest, I never felt that engaged in the mystery at all. Like I didn't really feel that curious about it. And then we got to the resolution and I was surprised by it, but I didn't really care all that much. This isn't a bad book at all. I think it's worth reading, but it's just not my favorite. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I finished Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. This is a nonfiction book and it takes a look at data bias between genders and how by building the world best suited for men, women's lives are greatly affected. This was a fascinating read, just like I hoped it was going to be, and I really, really liked it. When I was going into this book, I was prepared to be annoyed and shocked and maybe a little bit angry, but I really, really was surprised by how big of a problem this is. Like, it's not really something that I've ever thought about that deeply, and just seeing all of this laid out like this, it is enraging. We get to read about data bias in areas like medicine and academia and design, and it's really, really interesting to see what having the male as the default does to all areas of our life and how we do research. And it's just so odd how women, who are half the population, are considered kind of niche and like too complicated, and they should just be like more similar to men and it would work itself out, which is crazy. And it's interesting to see how in areas where we know things do not work the same on the male and the female body, we just don't do research on women because it's just niche, right? And it's just so infuriating. Like, I'm getting really getting really worked up just talking about it. It does sort of pose the question, when we know that things traditionally do not work exactly the same in men as in women. Like, for instance, in medicine, there are certain types of medication that works really well on men and it doesn't work on women. Why do we not do more research on that? Because it really isn't done a lot, and I think the obvious answer is that we don't care, and that's so incredibly sad. Another kind of crazy thing is that this default male, it doesn't even always represent all men. So it's just crazy to me. One size does not fit all. I do, by the way, really like how this book also touches on race and privilege as a part of this conversation, because I think that's really important and interesting. But I do wonder if the book should have just at least touched on transgender and non-binary people, if only to say that there isn't any research available or there isn't any data available. I think it's a little weird that it isn't mentioned. The introduction does talk about the difference between sex and gender, but I feel like just a little bit of information about that, like just acknowledging it, would have been a bonus. I do realize that that is like a whole other huge conversation, and I don't know how easy it would have been to sort of put this in here, but I just noticed that it wasn't there, so I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. If any of you guys have read this book, I would love to know if you noticed or if you thought about that at all. Now, there is a lot of information in this book, and I mean a lot. And there are paragraphs on paragraphs about statistics and percentages, and sometimes I think that that feels a little bit overwhelming and it's difficult to take in. And I wonder if maybe it could have been written a little bit differently so that it was easier to digest and try to like cram into my tiny brain. Overall though, I thought this was incredibly fascinating, and I think it's a really good book to read. I think it's great to read if you're a woman, because a lot of things in here I had never thought about it. But I also think it's very important to read if you're a man, because you might be even less aware of this. And I think that even though the book doesn't offer any solutions, we have to start at just knowing that it's a problem, and that's what this shows us. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend it. So those were all the books that I finished, but I thought before we go, just quickly, I would show you what I'm currently reading. I am reading this book in Norwegian. It's called Przewalski's Hest by Maja Linde, and this is a fiction novel. And then I'm also reading This Is Not a Drill by Extinction Rebellion, which is a non-fiction essay collection about climate change. Okay guys, those are all the books that I had to talk about today, and I hope this video doesn't end up being far too long. Let me know what you guys have been reading lately though, and I will see you soon. Bye!